Okay, so I just want to go over selectively, not completely, the list of the categories of people who do not have a share in Olam Haba. And as I mentioned, most of these are theological mistakes. They're not bad behaviors. So you could be a Machalel Shabbos, you could be a murderer, you could be eating treif, you could be committing adultery, and you have a din of a Rasha. But a Rasha, after serving Gehenim, does go to Olam Haba for the mitzvahs that they've done, unless they regret doing those mitzvahs. But you could be a very righteous, holy person, but if you don't have the right theological ideas, you might not be able to go to Olam Haba. So the Rambam is very rigid. You know, people often think or say that in Judaism, deed is more important than creed. Well, that may be true like some opinions, but it's not true according to the Rambam's opinion. According to the Rambam, it's very clear that creed is more important than deed, because the wrong creed can literally exclude you from Olam Haba. So I'm going to mention a few of them. Obviously, if a person is an atheist, the Rambam says he does not have a share in the world to come. Again, this is a little schwer. Remember what this means. Even if he is righteous, even if he is charitable, even if he does a tremendous amount of good in the world, if he does not believe in God, he does not have a share in Olam Haba. Now, what happens to him? So as I indicated yesterday, it's not that he'll go to hell, he'll have eternal damnation. What's the point of that? But it means that the neshama simply obliterates, meaning the neshama is simply broken. Technically, it doesn't get destroyed. What actually happens is it gets reabsorbed into the infinite energy of God. So in other words, it ceases to have an individual identity. Now again, this is talking about he didn't do tshuva. If a person did tshuva before he died, so obviously that erases that. So the question becomes, what reward does a righteous atheist get for all of the good that he did? He cured cancer. He gave charity. He helped many, many people. So the Rambam says, too bad. You don't believe in God, you don't have a share in the world to come. So what reward does he have? So the Rambam apparently would have to understand that he gets his reward in this world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give him osher and kavod and everything else. Problem is, I don't know if empirically that's always going to work out, meaning to say there may be poor atheists in the world who did a lot of good, who didn't have a particularly easy life. It's going to be a little difficult to define what is the reward that he got in this world. But still, that's the Rambam sheet. And I do want to point out that the Tiferes Yisrael, the commentary in the Mishnah in Perek Yud Aleph of Sanhedrin, does disagree with this. And he basically says there is a principle that Hashem does not withhold reward for any good that a person does. And therefore there is an idea that even an atheist will get rewarded for the good that he does. So remember that other shita. There is that shita. But the Rambam would disagree. The Rambam basically says, you don't believe in God? Okay, now even if you accept that one, let me just mention, I'll get you in a second. Then he goes on and says, if you believe in more than one God, you believe in duality, ein lo chelek l'olam haba. And the third one is, even if you believe in one God, but you believe that this God has a physical body or form. Okay, so the Rambam mentions 3 disqualifications. Either you don't believe in God, or you believe in more than one God, or you believe that God has a guf. Now, again, the thing that is so striking here is that you might be totally righteous in all other ways. Now, on this last one, anyone who believes that God has a guf does not have a share in Olam Haba unless he does tshuva on this. So the Ravid has an acerbic comment And the Breitowitz says, many people who are better than him, better than the Rambam, had the belief that God has a body because they were misled. So again, the Breitowitz does not disagree with the Rambam that God doesn't have a body. Right? The Breitowitz says those who believe that God has a body are being misled, but he says they were misled by the literal wording of psukim that talk about the hand of God, the eyes of God. So what is the Breitowitz saying? The Breitowitz is making a very important point here. That people who believe in the Torah, but they are misled by the literal wording of psukim, might be mistaken, but they don't necessarily forfeit their share in the world to come. So this is a big machlokes. So what does the Rambam hold about that? So they say in the name of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, a famous Yiddish aphorism that says, a nebuch apikairis is eichet an apikairis. That means what? Even if it's nebuch, meaning even if we feel sorry for him, even if there's no sin that he committed, he was simply misled. Tinoq Shenishba. He was raised in a certain environment. Or he was misled by psukim. So what? If he doesn't have the right mindset, he cannot be nichnas li'olam haba. Now this is an extraordinarily difficult issue. Remember I mentioned yesterday that the Rambam would apply the same rule even to non-Jews who could get a share in Olam Haba, but if they believe in duality or they believe that God has a body like Christianity and the like, the Rambam maintains that that is called an idolatrous belief. Did you want to say?
I had a question. What exactly did the Rambam mean by atheism, and what was atheism like in his time?
Well, the Rambam, there's no ambiguity. Ha'omer ein sham Eloika, a person who says there is no God, v'yein li'olam manhig, and there is no force that leads or controls the world. He doesn't use the word atheism, he uses the word, a person who says there's no God, I don't believe in God. No.
Is it possible that the Rambam expressed this opinion because maybe he didn't firmly believe this opinion, but since it's such a potentially severe punishment of Karaites, he wanted to express, just to be safe than sorry, this opinion rather than any other opinion?
Well, it's always a little bit of an uphill argument to say the Rambam doesn't exactly mean what he says, although sometimes people say that. But Vipashtus, I think this is consistent with the Rambam's overall orientation that correct theological perceptions of God are essential for admission to Olam Haba. Now again, there's always tshuva, number one. Number two, the Kabbalists introduced the idea of Gilgal, reincarnation, so even someone who doesn't have a share in Olam Haba might come back in a reincarnation, although I'm not sure if the Rambam accepted reincarnation as an idea. So there are second chances, because otherwise you have a real justice problem, and that is, if the Rambam means to say that even if I'm raised in a certain environment where I was never taught any of this, but if I have the wrong thought, I lose Olam Haba, you do have a real problem. Is that fair? Is it fair that God put me in an environment where I didn't have the opportunity to learn about the nature of God? Right, so that's a big problem. Now, I will tell you that the Radvaz, Rav David ben Zimra, who was a big posek in the time of Rav Yosef Karo. In fact, the Radvaz was actually one of the Rebbes of the Arizal. The Radvaz was a Kabbalist himself as well as a great posek. And the Radvaz absolutely says that somebody who makes an error in the nature of God, but does so because of his training, because of his background, because of the way he was raised, certainly does not forfeit Olam Haba, because there's no culpability, there is no fault that is involved. The pashtus is, as Rav Chaim says, the Rambam would argue at that point. although some want to say the Rambam might be moted to that point. The Rambam does not explicitly state it. See, I'll give you one example. The Rambam in Hilchos Mamrim. Hilchos Mamrim means the law of rebellious people. This is a Zakein Mamre, a member of the Sanhedrin, etc. Different. In fact, the Rambam includes a lot of things. It's kind of a cholent. He includes in Hilchos Mamrim all types of rebelliousness. Rebelliousness against the Sanhedrin, the obligation to listen to the Chachamim because of Lo Sasur, Kibud Aviyim, the obligation to listen to your parents, Ben Sora Umora, and he even throws in the laws of mourning, which seem to have nothing to do with it, but nevertheless, since these people are put to death, etc. In Hilchos Mamrim, the Rambam addresses the issue of Karaim, the Karaites. Now, just a little point of clarification here. Do not confuse the Karaim with the Tzedukim, although their beliefs overlap. The Tzedukim are the Sadducees. They were a movement that lived during the Second Temple period, during the time of the Mishnah. And the reason they're called Tzedukim is because the founder of that movement was a man called Sadok, and there was a parallel movement called Baisusim, which were led by a man called Baisus. As far as I know, nobody has ever articulated a difference between the philosophy of the Tzedukim and the Baisusim. They were simply two groups that subscribed to the same belief. And the essence of their belief was a denial in the authority of what we call Torah Shebal Peh. They accepted the written Torah, but they did not accept the interpretation of the Sanhedrin or the like. Tzedukim Baisusim. Interestingly enough, there were times that the Sanhedrin was controlled by the Tzedukim, in which they actually, and very often, there were times that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur happened to be a Tzduki. Right? The Mishnah in Yuma records that one of the halachic differences between the Tzedukim and the Prushim are the Pharisees, right? In the Christian Bible, the Pharisees are the bad guys. But from our perspective, the Prushim are Chazal, right? So the Pharisees are the good guys. Is that on Yom Kippur, when you bring the incense in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, when the Kohen Gadol, do you bring in the incense and then burn it in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Or do you enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim with smoking incense? So the Tzedukim maintain that you enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim with smoking incense. But the Chachamim say, no, you don't put the incense on the coals until you're in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So you may recall, every Erev Yom Kippur, the Chachamim would impose an oath on the Kohen Gadol that he will follow the order of the Prushim and he will not deviate from the Seder Avodah. He swore an oath in the name of God. And then it mentions the Chachamim would separate and weep, and the Kohen Gadol would weep. The Kohen Gadol would weep because he was suspected of being a tzduki, and the Chachamim would weep that they had to deal with this type of problem. So there were times that the Kohen Gadol was a tzduki. Of course, by the way, the interesting question you could raise, I don't want to be mafalpal in it. If the tzduki held that you're mechuyev to put the incense on the coal before you go to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then lishi taso, if he swore he wouldn't do it that way, that would be a shavua to transgress the Torah, which is not binding. In other words, what are the Chachamim accomplishing? I'm worried you're at Stuki, so I make you swear you'll do it our way. And you swear you'll do it our way. But according to your own view, that's not a binding oath, because our way is against halacha, right? So what are you accomplishing? If the guy's at Stuki, he'll do it his way, because the oath is null and void. Okay, that's a good kasha. Some say the notion of an oath against the Torah itself is a product of the oral law, so a Stuki would not have believed that and therefore would have followed the oath. Okay, but be it as it may, the Stukim largely became extinct with the Chorban Bayis Sheni in the year 70. There stopped being tzdukim. They didn't survive. I mean, could there be one or two? Who knows? But as a movement, it simply stopped. Now, the Karaites are a totally new and different movement that was created in the time of the Gaonim, the 800s, 900s. So this is after the Talmud. And it was founded by a guy who actually got mad that he didn't get a job that he wanted. So it's interesting. So he started a new religion. So he started off as a regular frum person. And basically, it was also a rebellion. Karaim, quite literally, means the Bible people, Mikra. They also focus, similar to the Tzdukim, but it's a totally different movement, on literal interpretation of the Torah, not accepting the rabbinic tradition. And they are called the Karaites. Now, Karaites, at different times in our history since then, were sometimes a very large movement. There were sometimes tens of thousands of Karaites. Now, there are Karaites even today. They're relatively small. There's a Karaite synagogue, a Karaite chief rabbi. Karaites, again, I mean, obviously, they are Jews. They are Jews because biologically they're Jews. But they are technically apikorsim because they do not believe in the oral law. They do not believe in, and that's also one of the chalakim that you don't ever share in Olam Haba if you're a kaifer in the Torah Shabbal Peh. Now, just to mention a few things about Karaites, it was very, very interesting. The Karaites, because they did not follow the Gemara, they did not follow the Mishnah, they did not accept it, although some Karaite scholars were actually very learned. There were Karaite scholars who learned Mishnah and Gemara, but they did not consider them halachically binding. So because of this, they put a tremendous amount of effort in learning Tanakh. So Karaites became very, very expert in grammar, in diktuk, and the like, ad kedei kach, that sometimes our classical meforshim will quote Karaite books in terms of diktuk. The Ibn Ezra, the Abarbanel will quote Karaite literature in terms of diktuk. And in fact, one of the great polemics against Christianity, Christian missionaries, to this day, they like to use, biblical verses to try to prove Yashka. For example, the virgin who gives birth, when of course the word Alma does not mean virgin, it means a young woman giving birth, etc., right? So we have in our Jewish literature, we have all sorts of books that refute the missionary claims by going over the psukim, because the problem is even many religious Jews do not know Tanakh at all. So the Christian missionaries can overwhelm you with all things. So we have books that go through the psukim. So one of the best books that go through the biblical psukim and show how they do not prove Christianity and indeed prove against Christianity is a book called Chizuk Emunah, The Strengthening of Faith. It's been translated in English as well, and I think it's available online. And it was written by Rabbi Yitzchak Troki, who was a Karaite. He was a Karaite. Now you might say, well, so why should I read a refutation of Christianity written by a Karaite? Well, the reason is a Karaite can deal with this maybe in a better way than a regular Talmud Chacham. Because a regular Talmud Chacham will start bringing in, the Talmud, what you're saying is wrong because the Talmud and the Medrash. And the Christian guy says, well, I don't believe in the Talmud and the Medrash. See, what the Karaite did was, the Karaite used nothing but the biblical verses themselves. So the Christian couldn't argue with that. You see, if I try to disprove a Christian argument by bringing in the Gemara, the Christian will just say, well, I don't care what the Gemara says. It doesn't mean anything. But the Karaite does not use the Gemara, does not use the Medrash, just uses the context and the grammar and the syntax of the biblical verses to make the case. So Chizuk Emunah, I don't know if any of you are interested in this type of thing, but if you are, Chizuk Emunah, written by a Karaite, is a very interesting book. As far as I know, there's really no apikorsis, because it's not like he doesn't use the book to attack Gemara. He just doesn't mention Gemara. So he goes through the psukim. So it's like Pashat Pshat of the psukim to make his case against the Christian claims from the so-called Old Testament. Okay. Now in the Rambam,
Like going back to the Rambam, he specifically says Olam Haba. Aren't there two ideas? There's like Olam Haba, and then there's like Gan Eden. One is like the spiritual, and one is like after the resurrection of the dead. Maybe he's referring to one and not the other.
yeah. So here you're touching
that
on.
Justify the reward for one, but not the other.
Yeah. But here I have to go back a little bit and touch on some important terminology. There is a big machlokas, nothing to do with what we're looking at per se, but it's important. There is a big machlokas, Rambam and Ramban, about what is the meaning of the term Olam Haba. According to Ramban, when you die after Gehenna or whatever it is, and your soul goes into the spiritual world without a body, and it's connected to God, according to Ramban, that is not yet Olam Haba, that is called Gan Eden, or the world of the soul. And as delightful as that is, and as pleasurable as that is not yet the final reward. According to Ramban, the final reward will happen after Mashiach comes, but not right away, but maybe 100 years after Mashiach, maybe 10,000 years after Mashiach, when the soul is reunited in the body, and there's resurrection of the dead. In effect, Olam Haba and Olam Hazeh come together. And that is eternal bliss. And that is the world of Techiyas HaMesim. And according to the Ramban, that is Olam Haba. According to the Ramban, Olam Haba is the world of resurrection, but the earlier stage of the spiritual world of the soul without the body is called Olam HaNeshamot or Gan Eden. That is indeed the Ramban's opinion. The Rambam's opinion, Maimonides' opinion, is actually very, very different. According to Rambam, Olam Haba is the world of the soul. And Techiyas HaMesim is not even permanent. Techiyas HaMesim is a miracle where God will bring the dead back to life to demonstrate his mastery over nature. But then they're going to die. They're going to die. And the only eternity is they're going to go back to Olam Haba. So according to the Rambam, Techiyas HaMesim is not even a stage in eternal reward. It's just going to be one of the miracles that God is going to do. That's why the Rambam was accused of not believing in Techiyas HaMesim, although he does believe in it, but he assigns to it much, much, much less of a role. So consequently, when the Rambam talks about Olam Haba, he is not talking about the world of Techiyas HaMesim. Yeah.
Are we obligated to follow all of the decrees and not be left right of the decrees from Sanhedrin at the time when they were dominated by the Sadducees?
Oh, are you bound to follow the decrees when the Sanhedrin was occupied by the Tzdukim?
Because in the Torah says, right,
Yeah.
that you're always supposed to follow what
Yeah.
the Sanhedrin. Does that include?
Yeah, so they were in a legal court, meaning they did not have halachic standing. You know, it reminds me a little bit, forgive me for digressing, it just popped into my head, free association. You know, there's this old controversy that Trump used to get involved in. It's whether Obama was born in the United States. If he wasn't born in the United States. So I just think to myself sometimes, again, I'm not interested in the particular issue of Obama, but you know, imagine somebody served 8 years as president, and let's assume we would now discover, let's assume 100% that he was not eligible to be president. I mean, you know what that means? That means every single law that was passed during those 8 years is invalid because there was no president to sign it. That means every judicial appointment was invalid. It was an invalid presidency. Now, again, I'm not speaking about Obama. I don't care about that. But this is what it is. There is such a thing as an illegal government. And as a result, the Sanhedrin by Tzdukim was an illegal Sanhedrin. Interestingly enough, by the way, there's a whole shiloh about this, about Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, Hitler was Chancellor of Germany for 12 years. From 1933 to 1945. Was that a legal government or not? It's a very fascinating question under international law because there's a lot of innocent people. I mean, there were people who worked in the German government who were just secretaries, who were bookkeepers, who were doing regular stuff. But if it's an illegal government, they couldn't get a pension. They couldn't get their pension for it, right? So under international law, the Nazi government is considered to be the legal government of Germany. And that's why people who earned their pensions or whatever are entitled to a pension. Masha Enkein Ditstukim would be halachically not valid. Okay. All of this is digression. Why am I bringing it up? I'm bringing it up because in the Rambam's own time, particularly in Egypt, Karaites were a huge population. They were a big, big, big group of people. And the Rambam had to deal with all sorts of shilas. What is our yichus? What is our relationship towards the Karaites? And the Rambam makes a few important points. He says the Karaites are halachically Jews, but the Karaites are technically apikorsim, who don't have a share in the world to come because they are kofar in the oral law. That's one of the grounds for not having a share in the world to come. But then the Rambam says the following. This only applies to the original Karaites who knew the Torah and made a decision to rebel. But the children and grandchildren who were born into this faith system are like a Tinoq Shenishba. They are like a kidnapped baby. And there's a mitzvah to be makarev them, to love them, to try to bring them to Judaism. So the Rambam clearly does introduce the notion of Tinoq Shenishba even on apikorsis, meaning it's not just Tinoq Shenishba for someone who doesn't keep Shabbos, but Tinoq Shenishba on these mistaken beliefs. But some say there's a chiluk between Kiruv and Olam Haba, meaning the Rambam does not say the second generation Karai gets a share in the world to come. Maybe not. The Rambam just says, since it's not his fault, try to be makarif him. You see, you have to differentiate the issues here. If the issue is, should I love him? Should I take care of him? Should I be makarif him? So there for sure, the Rambam says, hey, it's not his fault. He was raised that way. He didn't know any better. Try to be makarif him. But I hope you see that does not directly answer the question. Okay, it's not his fault. But if he doesn't have that right belief, as Rav Chaim said, it may still be he cannot go to Olam Haba. So you have an obligation to help him discover the true belief. Meaning, don't confuse the two issues. Legabe being makarev the person, the Rambam Vadai says you should be makarev the person. But that does not address the issue of the unintentional apikoris. Again, the Radvad says he does have a share in the world to come. The Rambam is mashma, he does not have a share in the world to come, even though there's a mitzvah to be makarev him to get him over that particular hump. Yeah.
Does it apply that an FFP goes off the derech, we shouldn't be
So it really kind of depends. Meaning to say, generally speaking, an FFP who goes off the derech, we try to be makarev, but sometimes the hostility may be so great that the person is not open to it. Meaning, the Rambam is suggesting psychologically, someone who is never exposed is more amenable to a kiruv than someone who rebels. Chazal themselves say, Shana upiresh, the person who learns Torah and separates, kasha mikulim is the most difficult. Again, unfortunately, I encounter this very, very, very often. I even coined the name, although somebody told me that the name was already used. I didn't invent it. The Mir Apikoris. Mir is M-I-R. In other words, the guy who went through the whole yeshiva system in Kollel, has 5 kids, and decides one day he doesn't believe in any of the stuff anymore. So what are you going to tell him? You're going to tell him all the Ohr Somayach arguments about Torah? You know what I'm saying? The guy's heard. I mean, not always, by the way, but the guy has heard it. The guy's been through it. So what are you going to tell him stuff he's already heard and he rejects for whatever reason? So it's just going to be a question of yelling some more about it. So this is an extraordinary, I mean, I get calls from parents and all sorts of things. This is an extraordinarily difficult type of kiruv operation. It is, not for amateurs and not even for professionals. So the truth of the matter is, not that we would negate kiruv, but it's extremely difficult. In fact, in many, many ways, the only way to be makarev is by Jewish experience, not by any type of argument. Just, the person comes for Shabbos, the person gets the pleasure of Torah, sees the sweetness of Torah. Don't try to argue or make any debating points in these types of situations. Yeah.
Does a person really have the ability to define themselves as an atheist? Atheism as a principle doesn't even actually make sense once if the person's knowledgeable enough to be exposed to Judaism the right way. So they're kind of like convincing themselves they're an atheist. They're playing pretend to some degree. Like it's like, there could be some kind of true atheist, someone who's out there, like Sam Harris trying to convince everybody. But if you're just sort of on your own, doing your own thing, not following Judaism, are you really an atheist or are you just confused?
Well, that's tricky. I mean, you can call it an agnostic, right? An atheist is technically somebody who truly believes there is no God. An agnostic is someone who says we don't know or we cannot prove.
What is it to believe? Okay, fine, I'm telling myself I truly believe it, but that doesn't necessarily mean, you could convince yourself of that.
No, well, that's true. Meaning a lot of things that we believe. What did they say? Somebody once went to the Beis Halevi and said, I have a lot of kashas, I have a lot of questions on the Torah. So the Beis Halevi said, you don't have kashas, you have terutzim. Terutzim are answers, excuses, meaning you don't have a kasha, you have an excuse to justify your decisions. Rav Schiller, Zechrona Livracha, used to say, it's a cute analogy. He says, let's imagine that God gave Moshe a Torah that said, you can do whatever you want, you can eat whatever you want, you can be whatever you want. He says, somehow he thinks people wouldn't have so many questions. How do I know the Torah comes from God? They would kind of course, Baruch Hashem, God gave us this wonderful Torah. Meaning to say that a lot of the questions, a lot of the doubts people have come from their psychological resistance to living with certain implications. Meaning, if God gave a Torah that has so many demands and so many obligations, maybe it's not true. If the Torah would fit what I want to do, I somehow wouldn't be bothered, even though the philosophical problem would be the same. In either event, what's the proof, right? But somehow it wouldn't bother me if it fit my prejudices or my conveniences. So yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of philosophy is a product of our psychology. And it's not as objective as we like it to be. We pride ourselves on objective thinking. The truth of the matter is it's very, very hard to be objective, and people can fool themselves all the time in many, many ways. And by the way, that's even if you're from. In other words, it's not only the question of God or not God, even in life decisions, this process happens all the time. By the way, this idea of Tinoq Shenishba comes up in another context with the Reform movement. According to the Rishonim, just as if a non-Jew touches wine, you're not allowed to drink the wine unless it's cooked. So if a Mechalel Shabbos B'farhesia, somebody who is Mechalel Shabbos publicly, a Jewish person touches the wine, so according to the strict halacha, you're not allowed to drink the wine. So in the 19th century, with the rise of the Reform movement, the Shaila was asked, if a Reformed Jew who does not keep Shabbos touches non-mevushal wine, am I allowed to drink it? He's a Machal Shabbos. So the Aruch Laner, Rav Yaakov Ettlinger, was the greatest posek in Germany. He was the Rebbe of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Aruch Laner, he wrote chidushim on different mesechtas, but in his Shelos Utshuvos that are called Binyan Sion, he differentiated between first generation Reform, meaning Orthodox people who became Reform, versus their children. And he actually used this argument that said that those who were raised Reform Jews are like Tinoq Shenishba, and therefore they're not accountable for their lack of Shmirat Shabbos, and therefore if they touch the wine is not prohibited. Now, not everybody agrees with that. Rebbe Yashiv of Shlomo Zalman, they were pretty strict, even today. But officially, at least, Ohr Somayach kind of subscribes to that psak. You know, in the mentor's mission, the mentors are very, they have fancy taste, so they don't like mavushal wine. They only like to bring non-mavushal wine, which I'm told, I cannot tell the difference at all, but I'm told non-mavushal wine has a higher quality taste. Maybe you guys know. So the problem is that a lot of the guys who show up for JLE don't keep Shabbos yet. So the question becomes, non-mavushal wine, is the wine prohibited? So the way it works is that the yeshiva's official psak is along the lines of the Binyan Sion, that we treat them as Tinoq Shenishba, but then they whisper to Rebbeim, don't have it, whatever it is. In other words, they tell people to be machmer if they want to be machmer, just so they should know that what the situation is. Of course, there are really an extra svara by JLE. In other words, the Binyan Sion svara was Tinoq Shenishba. But at a JLE, there's an additional svara that not only is it Tinoq Shenishba, but the person is on the way back, the derech of Shuva. Meaning there's a very big difference if you're on the way out, or you're out, but you're on the way back. This is an independent variable. And that is someone who comes to a JLE, even if they don't yet keep Shabbos, they are involved in a process that is intended to bring them closer to mitzvahs, and the fact that they're joining that process means that they're interested. So that's another svara to be made. Yeah.
Well, the fact that they're on the program now means that they know about Shabbat, they know how important it is. Doesn't that kind of take them out of the category?
Yeah. So the argument would go the following. The argument, you're right, because obviously they're no longer in the state of total ignorance. But the truth is, a Reformed Jew in Germany was also not totally ignorant. He knew his next door neighbor kept Shabbos. But the point is, if you were raised to think that this is not important, in other words, like I may know about all sorts of crazy religious rituals that these different Christians or Muslims or Hindus do, but as far as I'm concerned, it's crazy. So Tinoq Shenishba doesn't have to be, I didn't know, but it means I didn't realize this was significant or important. And that could be nichlal in Tinoq Shenishba. Okay? So again, the point I just wanted to make is that the Ein Lo Chelek L'Olam Above, the Rambam, is a very, very, very high standard. It may include a Tinoq Shenishba, but as I say, the Radvaz and the Ravid seem to disagree with that. The reason why this is important is, if you think about this, unfortunately, a tremendously large percentage of Jews in the world, under the Rambam's definition, would not have a share in the world to come, even though these are fine people. And we're not talking about evil people. We're talking about kind people, good people, compassionate people, productive people, helpful people. But they what? They don't believe that God gave the Torah at Mount Sinai. Ein lo chelek l'olam haba. Right? So this is a major, major, major issue. And, I would hope personally that the halacha would be like the Radvaz, that the Tinoq Shenishba, they get a pass even on this, but at least the Rambam's daya is going to be quite strict. Okay, we'll stop here.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.